Lightning cracked across the black sky, tearing silence into fear. Rain hammered the mountainside, blurring stone and soil into a roaring stream. Deep in a hollow, Riven whimpered, his small body shivering in the shadows. Varra pressed her muzzle to him and whispered, "Stay close, my son." The storm carried the scent of blood, sharp and urgent. From the ridge above, Grath prowled, eyes glowing like embers, his hunger cloaked in the downpour. The wind shrieked like a predator itself, tearing branches free and hurling them into the night. Riven whimpered louder, and Varra snapped, "Quiet or death will hear us." The shadows stretched, writhing like living things, twisting against the storm's flashes. Danger was not creeping, it had already arrived. In that moment, safety died, and the law of survival announced itself with merciless clarity. Rain carved the earth into rivers, drowning the quiet forest. Riven pressed himself deeper against Varra, his small chest heaving with every breath. "It's too loud," Riven whispered, though his voice was nearly lost to the storm. Varra's gaze burned into the dark, searching for Grath's silhouette. "The storm is not our enemy," she muttered. "The shadow is." A branch crashed behind them, splitting the soil, sending mud flying. Riven yelped, but Varra pulled him closer, her teeth clenched. Grath's growl rolled through the storm, a low vibration that slithered into their hollow like poison. Fear sank its claws into Riven, and his golden eyes shimmered with tears. The night was not just cruel, it was watching, waiting for the moment they faltered. Thunder exploded, shaking stone and bone alike. Riven whimpered and buried his muzzle into Varra's chest. "He's near," he gasped. Varra's ears twitched as she listened, her muscles taut with dread. She whispered, "Do not fear the storm, Riven. Fear what hunts inside it." Grath's outline flickered into view atop the ridge, framed in lightning's cruel light. His eyes fixed downward, unblinking, predatory. Riven whimpered again, trembling uncontrollably. The shadows seemed alive, stretching toward him, writhing like claws. Varra pressed her paw firmly against him, forcing him still. "Silence saves lives," she breathed. The forest groaned, branches collapsing, earth shivering. Grath's growl spread again, curling around them like smoke. Riven closed his eyes, wishing the dark would swallow him whole. Wind clawed through the hollow, spraying rain and mud into their eyes. Riven shivered violently, unable to stop the sound rising from his throat. "Mother, I cannot be quiet," he pleaded. Varra lowered her muzzle and whispered, "Then listen. And let silence teach you." Grath moved down the ridge, his paws sliding on wet stone, his eyes never leaving their den. The shadows writhed around him, as though guiding his path. Riven pressed his body under Varra's chest, his heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo. "The shadows," he whispered. Varra's fur bristled as she hissed, "Never trust them. They belong to death." The storm surged again, thunder consuming the hollow. Riven froze, realizing the darkness was no longer empty. It was waiting. The hollow shook as another crack of thunder split the mountain. Riven whimpered, his paws clawing the mud. "He will find us," he whispered. Varra forced her body over him, her gaze locked on the shifting dark. Grath's growl grew louder, nearer, as if the shadows themselves carried his breath. Lightning revealed his shape halfway down the ridge, massive, unstoppable. Varra snarled, a sound sharp enough to cut through the storm. "He is strong," she whispered, "but we endure." Riven shut his eyes, pressing against her warmth, clinging to her promise. The shadows stretched farther, curling into their hollow like talons. Varra braced herself, chest heaving. In that moment, Riven felt what she meant. Survival was not safety. It was defiance against all odds. Dawn broke slowly, spilling pale light through the forest's broken canopy. Rain still dripped from torn branches, echoing like a reminder of the storm's violence. Riven stumbled forward, paws sinking into the wet soil, his small body heavy with exhaustion. Varra guided him gently, her flank brushing against his side. "Strength is not born in calm," she murmured, It is carved in storms. Riven lifted his head, golden eyes wide with confusion. He asked, "But what if I am too small?" Varra lowered her gaze to him, amber eyes fierce yet tender. "Then your heart must grow larger than your fear." The forest smelled of damp earth and broken pine. Silence hung, but it was fragile. Every shadow seemed to breathe, waiting for their weakness to show. The ground softened beneath their paws, each step sinking into the mud. Riven tripped and yelped, collapsing awkwardly. Varra nudged him upright with her muzzle, whispering, "Fall, then rise again. That is survival." Riven panted, chest rising and falling too quickly. "It hurts," he said. Varra's ears twitched, catching distant echoes that stirred unease. She whispered, "Pain is the first teacher, and it is never gentle." Riven steadied himself, trembling but determined, his paws gripping the soil tighter this time. Birds stirred above them, shaken loose from branches, their calls piercing the silence. Riven swallowed, his fear heavy, yet his eyes clung to Varra's strength. For the first time he felt the weight of her words press into his bones. The forest path narrowed, twisting between jagged stones. Riven stumbled again but forced himself onward, each breath ragged. Varra moved ahead, scanning the shadows with sharp focus. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she said. "It is moving despite it." Riven whispered, "But fear follows me everywhere." Varra paused and looked back, her fur damp, her gaze steady. "Then let it follow. It will never lead if you do not let it." Riven's golden eyes shimmered with uncertainty, but something shifted in his step. His paws still shook, yet he did not fall this time. Overhead, sunlight pierced briefly through the canopy, glinting off wet rock, painting the path ahead in fleeting hope. Varra whispered, "Every step is defiance." They reached a clearing where broken trees lay scattered, roots torn from the storm's rage. Riven gazed around, eyes wide, chest heaving with awe and fear. "Did the shadows do this?" he asked softly. Varra lowered her muzzle, brushing the soil scarred by wind. "Storm is the earth's fury," she said. "Shadows only steal from it." Riven patted closer, sniffing at a broken branch, mud streaking his fur. Varra's amber eyes softened as she watched him. "The world is cruel, Riven, but it is also the only teacher we have." Riven pressed against her side, silent now. In that clearing, among scars of destruction, he understood her strength was carved not from safety but from loss. And he knew his journey had only begun. The air grew heavy with silence, broken only by dripping water. Riven nestled against Varra, his small body trembling less than before. "Will it always be this hard?" he asked. Varra brushed her muzzle over his head and answered, "Yes, and that is why we endure." Riven closed his eyes briefly, drawing comfort from her warmth. Then, distant howls rolled across the forest, sharp and cold. Varra stiffened, her body tense. Riven looked up, fear tightening his chest. "Is it him?" he whispered. Varra did not answer, her eyes locked on the horizon, her silence enough to confirm. The bond between them deepened, not from peace but from the weight of danger closing in. Riven pressed closer, vowing not to let go. The forest grew darker, though the sun still stood high, shadows weaving thicker between the trees. Riven stumbled over roots, panting hard. Varra slowed, scanning the silence that pressed down too tightly. "He follows," she whispered, her ears twitching. Riven's golden eyes widened, and he asked, "Grath?" Varra gave no answer, but her tense body was truth enough. A crow shrieked from above, scattering leaves into the damp air. Riven pressed close to her, his small frame shaking. "The world feels heavier," he whispered. Varra lowered her head and growled, "Because danger breathes behind us." Every sound magnified, a crack of twig, the rush of distant water, the steady rhythm of unseen steps. Riven knew they were not alone anymore. They moved faster, paws splashing through shallow streams, mud clinging to fur. Riven stumbled again, but Varra pulled him forward with a sharp nudge. "Do not stop," she commanded. Riven whimpered, I cannot outrun him. Varra's voice was low, unyielding. Then endure until he tires. Behind them, Graf's growl rolled like thunder, closer than before. Riven's ears flattened, terror knotting his chest. He wants me, Riven whispered. Varra snarled, her teeth flashing. He wants weakness, but he will find strength. The air grew heavy with damp earth and fear, every step an echo of pursuit. The forest narrowed into a tunnel of twisted branches, and Riven felt the shadows stretching longer, chasing them. The ground broke into jagged stone, slicing Riven's paws. He yelped, stumbling as blood dotted the rock. Varra circled back, pressing against him, her amber eyes blazing. Pain is nothing compared to death, she growled. Riven whimpered, but it hurts too much. Varra pressed her muzzle against his head. Then let it remind you to move. Above them, Graf's dark shape appeared against the ridge, his yellow eyes locked on the pup. Riven froze, terror rooting his paws to the stone. Varra snapped her jaws and shoved him forward. If you stop, you give him victory. The air crackled with tension, Graf's growl carrying down like a storm's warning. Riven staggered onward, bleeding but alive. The forest opened into a ravine, its edges steep and unforgiving. Riven peered down, heart hammering at the rushing river below. We cannot cross, he gasped. Varra's gaze swept the distance, sharp and calculating. We must, she replied. Behind them Graf's snarl echoed, a promise of no escape. Riven trembled, tail pressed tight against his body. He will push us over, he whispered. Varra growled low, her muscles stiff with resolve. Then, we fall fighting, not fleeing. She stepped closer to the ravine's edge, testing the unstable ground. Rocks slid into the depths, swallowed by the raging water. Riven shuddered, realizing the world had narrowed into two choices: leap or be devoured. The wind howled through the ravine, carrying Graf's growl into every corner. Riven pressed against Varra, trembling. He will kill us, he cried. Varra lowered her muzzle to his ear. Not if we refuse him victory. Graf emerged from the shadows, his black coat dripping with rain, his yellow eyes fixed on the pup. Riven whimpered, his paws sliding dangerously near the edge. Graf's lips curled into a snarl, hunger burning in his stare. Varra stepped between them, her body shielding Riven, her amber eyes defiant. You will not have him, she growled. Lightning split the sky, framing the ravine in ghostly white. Riven clung to her warmth, realizing their fight had only begun. The storm's rage faded into eerie silence, the ravine trembling under its own weight. Riven clung to Varra, his heart pounding. Graf stepped closer, his yellow eyes locked on them. But his growl faltered, and for a heartbeat, his gaze shifted toward the sky. Riven blinked, confused by the hesitation. Varra's fur bristled, her stance low, ready to strike. Yet Graf did not attack. Instead, he let out a hollow snarl, his head lifting toward the horizon. The air carried another sound, sharp, cold, and distant. Howls, dozens of them, layered into the wind. Riven shivered, whispering, "He is not alone." Varra's amber eyes hardened, her breath steady. The enemy was not one wolf but many, and the forest itself seemed to betray them. Riven trembled as the chorus of howls swelled, carried through the ravine like an approaching storm. Varra growled low, her body pressed against his, her eyes burning with dread. This was never about the hunt, she muttered. Graf's stare returned to them, fierce but layered with something darker than hunger. Riven whimpered, his golden eyes locked on Graf's torn ear and scarred muzzle. He runs from them too, Riven whispered, realization striking. Varra stiffened, her breath catching. Graf's snarl broke into a guttural cry, not of triumph but warning. The truth cut deep, predator and prey were both hunted now. The forest no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the shadows of a rival pack that closed in with merciless intent. The rival howls grew closer, echoing like drums of war. Riven pressed his muzzle into Varra's chest, shaking. "Why do they come?" he whispered. Varra's eyes flickered toward Grath, who remained rigid, his gaze fierce yet unwilling to move closer. They come for power, she said softly, and power devours everything. Grath snarled again, stepping back, his ears pressed flat. He was not the hunter anymore, but the hunted, cornered between cliffs and shadows. Riven's chest tightened with fear and confusion. He is not our enemy, he asked. Varra's gaze hardened, her voice sharp. Every wolf is an enemy when survival demands it. Yet she did not attack, and neither did Grath. The truth weighed heavier than fear. Alliances were written in desperation. A low wind carried the scent of the rival pack. Musk, blood and hunger layered thick. Riven gagged on the weight of it. Varra lowered herself, pressing Riven tighter to the earth. Stay hidden, and do not move, she whispered. Grath's growl deepened, his muscles flexing as his gaze darted toward the growing silhouettes on the horizon. Riven whispered, he fears them. Varra's amber eyes never left Grath's form. Fear teaches us what strength cannot, she said. A shadow detached from the distance, a massive figure leading the charge. Riven's golden eyes widened, his body trembling uncontrollably. The truth was undeniable now. The storm was never their greatest enemy. It was betrayal, rivalry, and the endless hunger of wolves against wolves. The rival pack's howls split the night, echoing through the ravine like the voice of death. Riven pressed his body flat to the ground, tears glistening in his golden eyes. Why us? He whispered. Varra bristled, her amber gaze never leaving the advancing shadows. Because survival demands victims, she growled. Grath bared his teeth, his snarl shaking the air, but his body trembled as if he too knew the futility. The truth revealed itself with brutal clarity. Grath was no lone hunter. He was a fugitive, chased from his own kind, desperate to survive. And now, Varra and Riven were caught in his storm. The darkness no longer stalked them from afar. It surrounded them, closing every escape, waiting for the first drop of blood to fall. The rival pack poured from the mist, their howls splitting the air into shreds of terror. Riven pressed into Varra's chest, his body trembling. Grath lowered his head, teeth bared, muscles quivering like drawn steel. Stay down, Varra, whispered sharply. Riven's golden eyes welled with fear, his small paws scraping against stone. The rivals advanced, eyes glowing, their bodies weaving as one relentless shadow. Grath lunged first, crashing into the nearest wolf with a savage snarl. The sound of teeth on flesh ripped through the ravine. Varra's body shook, her stance unbreakable. Riven whispered, he fights them, confusion tightening his voice. Varra's amber eyes narrowed. He fights to live, nothing more. Blood stained the air, and survival became a storm of fangs. The battle thundered across the ravine, claws scraping stone, snarls tearing the night apart. Riven shrank back, ears pressed flat, eyes wide with terror. Grath slammed into another wolf, his jaws clamping down with bone-crushing force. Varra shifted, her amber gaze locked on the chaos, her breath ragged. The storm was mercy compared to this, she muttered. Riven whimpered, why do they hate us? Varra growled low, her teeth flashing. This is not hate, it is hunger. The rivals circled, some clashing with Grath, others prowling closer to the hollow. Riven's heart pounded so loud he thought it would betray him. Blood streaked the stone, and the ravine echoed with war. Nature itself demanded sacrifice. The largest rival wolf lunged forward, towering over Grath, their bodies colliding in a storm of fury. Riven gasped, his paws clawing helplessly at the ground. Varra snarled, her body shifting to block a smaller wolf creeping toward them. Her fangs flashed, her growl ripping through the chaos. Stay behind me, she commanded. Riven whispered, Mother, you'll be hurt. Varra's amber eyes locked on his trembling form. Then, I will bleed before you do. Grath roared, driving the larger rival toward the ravine's edge, claws raking fur and stone alike. Riven pressed flat to the earth, his heart shattering under the weight of violence. Survival had no mercy. It demanded blood, and the night was eager to drink it. The ravine shook as Grath drove his rival toward the edge, their snarls echoing like thunder. Riven yelped as stones broke free, tumbling into the roaring river below. Varra's muscles rippled as she lunged, knocking back a wolf that dared strike at Riven. Blood streaked her muzzle, her breath ragged but fierce. Riven cried, "You're bleeding." Varra growled, never turning her head. Blood is the price of life. Grath roared again, forcing his opponent backward until both teetered on the edge. For a heartbeat, the world froze, lightning splitting the sky in silence. Riven pressed his muzzle into the dirt, trembling. In that silence, he felt the truth. Survival was not won with strength, but with sacrifice. Grath roared and lunged, dragging the massive rival wolf over the ravine's edge. Both vanished into the churning abyss below, their cries swallowed by the raging river. Riven gasped, his golden eyes wide, tears streaking his muzzle. "He fell," he whispered. Varra stood still, her chest heaving, her amber gaze locked on the cliff. The rivals froze, their leader gone, their fury crumbling into silence. One by one, they retreated into the mist, their howls fading into the distance. Riven pressed into Varra's chest, sobbing softly. Why did he do it? Varra lowered her muzzle to him, whispering, "Because even shadows must fall." The ravine stood quiet again, but the ground smelled of blood and sacrifice, carved into memory forever. The river below still roared, swallowing Grath and the rival with its endless fury. Silence pressed against the ravine, heavy and absolute. Riven buried his face into Varra's chest, his small body shaking with sobs. "He is gone," he whispered, voice trembling. Varra's amber eyes stayed fixed on the cliff edge, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. "He chose his end," she said softly. "And in doing so, he gave us a chance." Riven lifted his golden eyes, tears glistening, confusion burning within. "But he was our enemy." Varra lowered her muzzle, brushing against his head. "Even enemies can protect a life when death hunts them too." The truth weighed like stone. Survival had been bought with blood, and it would not be forgotten. The rival pack had vanished, their howls fading into distance, leaving the ravine scarred by silence. Riven trembled, his golden eyes darting to the shadows. "Will they return?" he asked. Varra pressed closer, her voice steady but grave. "They always return, for hunger never sleeps." Riven swallowed hard, paws trembling against the stone. "Then we are never safe?" Varra's gaze drifted to the rising sun piercing through mist, her amber eyes reflecting its light. "Safety is a lie, Riven," she murmured. "But survival is truth." Riven blinked, his chest heavy with fear yet stirred by her strength. Around them, the world felt hollow, as though every echo belonged to ghosts of the fallen. The storm had passed, but its weight remained carved into their bones. They moved slowly away from the ravine, paws heavy, bodies worn. Riven limped, his pads raw, each step leaving faint streaks of red. Varra walked beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "The earth remembers every wound," she said softly. Riven looked up, his golden eyes clouded. "And what if I cannot keep walking?" Varra lowered her muzzle, her amber gaze unwavering. "Then you crawl, and even crawling is defiance." Riven's body shook, but he pushed forward, his breath sharp and shallow. The forest ahead seemed darker, each tree bending with unspoken weight. Yet beneath the silence, Riven felt something stir within. Not the absence of fear, but the spark of endurance that Varra carried like fire in her blood. The air smelled of wet bark and distant ash, remnants of storms and battles alike. Riven stumbled, nearly collapsing. Varra paused, lowering herself to nudge him gently. "Rest, little one," she whispered, her breath soft against his fur. Riven closed his eyes, panting. "I do not want to dream of shadows again." Varra's amber gaze drifted upward to the sky, where clouds thinned into pale streaks. "Dreams do not kill us," she said firmly. but forgetting them does. Riven leaned against her, his trembling slowing, her warmth shielding him from the chill. Around them, the silence hummed with finality. The war was over, but survival demanded they carry every scar forward. And Riven began to understand the weight of memory. As daylight stretched across the forest, the ravine behind them faded into mist. Riven limped forward, his golden eyes heavy with exhaustion but steadier than before. "Will we endure, Mother?" he whispered. Varra's amber eyes glowed faintly in the new light. "We already have," she answered. Riven pressed closer to her, feeling the pulse of her heart, strong and unyielding. For the first time his trembling eased. The shadows still lingered, curling at the edges of trees, but he no longer looked away. He had seen death, sacrifice, and betrayal, and yet he walked still. Varra lifted her head, her body scarred but defiant. "The storm is over," she murmured, "but its echo will live inside us." The forest stretched in silence, morning light spilling across broken earth. Riven limped beside Varra, his golden eyes weary but awake. He whispered, "The storm is gone, yet it still lives in me." Varra's amber gaze softened as she brushed against him. "Storms never leave," she murmured. "They shape us." The wind carried faint echoes of howls, but distant and fading. Riven lowered his head, fear clinging to his chest. "What if they return?" he asked. Varra's breath was steady, her body scarred yet strong. "Then we meet them as survivors, not prey." Riven pressed closer, paws heavy, but his heart lighter. The shadows lingered in the trees, yet their presence no longer held him captive. Something within had changed forever. They paused by a fallen tree, its trunk scarred by lightning. Riven studied the blackened wood, his golden eyes reflecting fire that once raged. "The world breaks everything," he whispered. Varra stood tall, her amber gaze calm. "Yes," she said, "but it also teaches how to rise." Riven leaned into her, silent, the smell of char still clinging to the bark. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the storm roared again in memory. His paws trembled, but he did not fall. Varra pressed her muzzle gently against his back. "Every scar tells the story of endurance," she murmured. Riven opened his eyes again, and where fear had lived, a spark of defiance now flickered. The forest path narrowed into silence, only the drip of dew echoing. Riven moved with slow steps, his limp still sharp, but his head higher than before. "I feel smaller than the world," he confessed. Varra's amber eyes softened, and she brushed against him. "We are all small, Riven. Survival does not ask for size, but for will." Riven's golden eyes shimmered as he whispered, "And if the shadows come again?" Varra's breath was steady. "Then you show them you are still here." The wind rustled above, scattering light across damp leaves. Riven took another step, his chest heaving, but his eyes no longer looked back. He had learned the cruelest truth. Survival was defiance carved into bone. They reached a ridge where the forest stretched endless below. The horizon glowed with morning fire, the world vast and unforgiving. Riven halted, staring wide-eyed at the expanse. "It never ends," he whispered. Varra stepped beside him, her amber eyes locked on the horizon. "No," she said softly, "but neither do we." Riven pressed close, his chest trembling. The memory of Grath's fall burned in his mind, a shadow that would never fade. Yet in that shadow, he felt the weight of sacrifice, of strength not his own. He whispered, "Even shadows can protect." Varra bowed her head briefly, then lifted it again, her body strong, her scars glistening in sunlight. The silence carried their truth across the endless sky. The wind stilled, carrying only the faint cry of distant crows. Riven pressed against Varra, his golden eyes heavy with exhaustion but alive. "We survived," he whispered. Varra's gaze lingered on the horizon, her amber eyes unwavering. "Yes," she said, "but survival is not the end. It is the echo." Riven lifted his head, his trembling eased, the world vast but no longer crushing. Behind them, The forest whispered with memories of storms and blood. Ahead, the path stretched endless, unforgiving. Varra moved forward, her scars glowing in dawn's light, and Riven followed. The silence broke with his steady breath, carrying the final truth. Survival was fragile, fleeting, but unforgettable. And its echo would never fade.